He was the most feared man in Seoul, and he was kneeling. The rain fell in hard, silver needles, a cold and angry storm that turned the polished stone of the courtyard into a field of shattered black glass. And in the center of it all stood Seo Jin-woo, the ghost of Itaewon, a man whose silence could end careers or end lives. He was draping his own $1,000 coat over the shoulders of a woman the world had decided was worthless. Her name was Folake Ideal, and she was trembling. It wasn't just the cold, though that had settled deep in her bones. It was the unreality of the moment. The head of the Crimson Banner Syndicate was on one knee in front of her, his dark, intense eyes locked on hers, as if she were the only thing in the storm. I thought, she would whisper to herself, much later, in the safety of the dark, that I was invisible, a ghost in his house, until the night he saw me. Men like Seo Jin-woo didn't kneel. They didn't show kindness. They didn't protect. They took. His empire was built on the ashes of his rivals, on secrets buried so deep they were part of the earth. They whispered he'd had a man erased from existence simply for breathing too loudly in a negotiation. His stillness was more terrifying than another man's rage. So why? Why was the most powerful man in Korea protecting a black maid, a woman he should not have even known existed, a woman who had been hiding in the storm just to eat a piece of stale bread? But here is the truth about a single, unexpected kindness in a life built on violence. It is louder than a gunshot. It doesn't go unnoticed. And that one act of mercy, that one moment of seeing her, had just painted a target on Folake's back. A target neither of them could see. The master of the house just gave his coat to a woman everyone else stepped over. Think about that. Have you ever felt so unseen, so erased, that a single look from someone felt like a miracle? Like the world finally admitting you were real? That's what this was for Folake. A miracle wrapped in razor wire. Because in a house where every kindness is seen as a weakness, the knives were already coming out. His men were watching. They were always watching. What happens when the coldest heart and soul begins to thaw for the one person he should never have noticed? And what happens when the man who just saved you is the very man who owns your cage? Before I tell you how this impossible story unfolds, how trust was built and then shattered, and how love and betrayal became the same thing, do me a solid. Hit that subscribe button for Afro-Korean Soul Tales and comment to let me know where you're watching from. You have no idea what's coming next. Seoul, on the surface, was a city of light. It glowed with the neon pulse of Gangnam, the shimmering towers where deals were made, and the quiet, old money palaces hidden behind high walls. But beneath that glitter, the city had a different heartbeat, a shadow rhythm of power, debt, and fear. Seo Jin-woo was that heartbeat. At 32, he was a legend. Self-made. Untouchable. The ghost. As head of the Crimson Banner Syndicate, he didn't just own businesses. He owned the shadows they cast. Underground casinos, high-stakes lending, prime real estate bought with money that didn't officially exist, and government contracts that were signed, sealed, and buried before the public ever heard of them. If it was profitable and hidden, Jin-woo had a piece of it. He hadn't been born to this. There was no family name, no inheritance. He was just an orphan, spat out of a state-run children's home with nothing but a cold fire in his gut and a rage that kept him sharp. He'd climbed out of that hole on a ladder made of other men's mistakes. They said his stare could stop a man's heart, that his throne was built on the bones of those who underestimated him. That mercy was just a word in a language he refused to learn. And they were right. His mansion, a fortress of cold marble and bulletproof glass, perched on a hill overlooking the Han River. It was more museum than home. The air inside was still and cold. The staff moved like whispers, silent, efficient, and terrified. They lived by simple rules. Don't speak unless you are spoken to. Don't look the master in the eye. Don't ask questions. Ever. The floors were polished to a mirror shine. The crystal chandeliers were so clean they looked like captured light. Everything was perfect. But underneath the sterile beauty was a darkness you could feel in your chest. A heavy, waiting silence. It was the kind of place where a person could simply stop existing, and no one would ever be brave enough to ask why. Jin-woo liked it that way. He ruled through fear. He kept his distance through silence. He trusted no one. He loved nothing. He expected everyone to betray him, because in his life, everyone always had. Until her. Until the night he came home and saw Folake Ideal huddled in the rain. until he saw her clutching a piece of bread so stale it was barely food. Her jacket was a thin, useless rag soaked to her skin, her lips blue with cold. But her eyes, even in her misery, her eyes weren't broken. They were still burning. And something deep inside him, a part of himself he thought he'd starved to death 20 years ago, suddenly cracked open. Her name was Folake Ideal, and she was a prisoner who didn't even know the name of her jailer. At 25, she was supposed to be starting her life. A nursing graduate from Lagos, she had a smile that could disarm a room and dreams that were bigger than her small apartment. She'd worked 4 years of university, pulling double shifts at a local clinic, saving every single naira. Folake believed in the most dangerous thing of all, hope. She believed that hard work would be rewarded, that she could build a better life for her mother and her younger brother, that the world was, at its core, good. So when the email arrived, it felt like a prayer answered. A sleek logo, perfect professional English. A nursing position at a high-end private hospital in Seoul. Housing was included. The salary was more than she'd ever dreamed of. It was real. She didn't hesitate. She hugged her mother, tears in her eyes. "Mama, I'm going to change everything for us. I promise." She got on that plane with one suitcase, her nursing certificate rolled into a protective tube, and a future so bright it was all she could see. The moment she stepped into the arrivals hall at Incheon, her future vanished. The man holding the sign with her name, Park Sung-jin, wore an expensive suit and a smile that was all teeth. "Welcome to Korea, Miss Ideal. We are so pleased to have you. I just need to take your passport to finalize your work visa processing. It's a formality." She handed it over. She was trusting. She was hopeful. She was naive. It was the last time she would ever hold her own passport. An hour later, the hospital shuttle was a black van with tinted windows, heading away from the city. The hospital, the job, the apartment, it was all smoke. There was only Mr. Park, his smile gone, and a contract she couldn't read, written in Korean. "You have a debt now," he said, his English suddenly broken and harsh. "The flight, the visa, my fee. You work. You work until the debt is paid." She tried to argue. She demanded her passport. She tried to get out of the van. But where do you run? You're in a foreign country. You don't speak the language. You don't know a single person. And the only proof of who you are is locked in a safe belonging to a man who just stole your life. So Folake Ideal, the dreamer, the nursing graduate, the daughter, became a maid. A piece of property in the house of a man she had never seen. A man named Seo Jin-woo. Her new life was a gray, endless loop. 16 hours a day. 18 hours, on nights when he had guests. She was on her feet until her ankles swelled and her back felt like it would snap. She scrubbed marble floors that were already clean. She polished glass panels that had no fingerprints. She changed bed linens in rooms that were never slept in. The servants' quarters were a converted storage area in the back of the estate. A concrete floor, a mattress so thin you could feel the metal frame beneath it, and a single, bare bulb that flickered. She ate scraps. Whatever the main kitchen staff decided to leave. Cold rice, the ends of vegetables, soup that was mostly water. But every month, she took the small cash payment she was given and wired half of it home. She had to. It was the only thing that kept her sane. In her messages to her mother, she lied. "Mama, the hospital is so beautiful. Everyone is so kind. Yes, I'm eating well. The food is amazing. I'm saving money. I'll come visit as soon as I can." She lied because the truth would destroy her mother. The truth, that her daughter was trapped, starving, a slave to criminals, would kill her. And Folake refused to let that happen. But you have to understand this about Folake. She never begged. She never broke. Not once. Not when the head maid, Madame Jang, screamed at her for folding a towel with the crease facing the wrong way. Not when her hands cracked and bled from the harsh cleaning chemicals because she wasn't allowed gloves. Not even when she went 2 days with nothing but water because the kitchen staff forgot to leave her scraps. She never, ever cried. Not in front of them. She saved her tears for the deep of night, when the wind howled loud enough to cover the sound of her gasping for air. Crying meant you were broken. Breaking meant you gave up. And giving up meant you disappeared. The other maids made sure she understood what happened to those who broke. There were 5 other women on the household staff. All of them Korean. All of them older and worn down by fear. They spoke in fast, hushed whispers and never, ever met her eyes. One night, An older woman named Mrs. Park, who worked in the laundry, pulled Folake into a linen closet. Her face was kind, but her eyes were terrified. "Listen to me, child," she whispered in shaky, halting English. "You must listen. In this house, you are not a person. You are a shadow. You do your work. You keep your head down. You hear nothing. You see nothing. You do not ask questions." She gripped Folake's arm. "And you never let him see you." "Never." "Him?" Folake asked, though she already knew. Mrs. Park's face went pale, as if speaking his name would summon him. "The master. Mr. Seo. The ones he notices, they don't stay." What happens to them?" Mrs. Park looked away, pulling her hand back. "I don't know, and I don't ask. You shouldn't either." That was the last real conversation Folake had with anyone for 3 long months. Her world shrank. Her days became a simple, painful rhythm. Wake at 5 a.m. Polish the grand staircase. Dust the library that no one ever read in. Wipe the glass walls of the East Wing. Prepare linens. Serve tea to Madame Jang. Stay invisible. And Jin-woo, he was a ghost. He moved through the house like he was made of different matter. He didn't walk past the staff. He walked through them, as if they were just air. Not cruel, not unkind. Just absent. He didn't see them. Folake would catch a glimpse of him in the mornings, descending the staircase in a perfectly tailored suit, his face a mask of cold control. He never looked at her. He never spoke. And that was good. That was safe. But the house itself screamed warnings. There were rooms in the basement that were always locked. There were deliveries that came at 3 a.m., silent men carrying heavy cases. There were other men in dark suits who arrived without knocking and left hours later, their faces grim. One morning, Folake found a dark, sticky stain on the marble floor by the side entrance. It was blood. Her stomach twisted, but she just got her cleaning supplies and scrubbed it until it was gone. She didn't ask. She didn't speak. She just scrubbed, her hands shaking. Madame Jang, the head maid, was a woman with sharp eyes and a sharper tongue. She watched Folake like a hawk, waiting for a mistake. "You are slow," she would snap in Korean, knowing Folake couldn't understand the words, only the hate in her voice. Folake just learned the tone. She learned to move faster. She learned to apologize with her eyes and make herself smaller, to fade into the background. And when the work was too much, when the loneliness felt like it was crushing her chest and her body screamed with exhaustion, she had one small, secret rebellion. She would hum, very softly, under her breath, Nigerian lullabies her mother used to sing, Igbo hymns, anything that reminded her that she was still Folake. And she saved half her food. Every single meal, no matter how small, she tore it in half. She ate one part and wrapped the other in a napkin, tucking it deep into her pocket. It wasn't because she wasn't hungry. She was always hungry. The hunger was a constant, dull ache. But saving something, anything, was an act of control. It was an act of defiance. It meant she was still planning for a later. It meant she was still human. What she didn't know, what she couldn't possibly have known, was that someone was watching. Seo Jin-woo noticed everything. It was how he'd survived. It was how he'd built his empire. He saw it all on the high-definition security feeds in his office. He saw the new maid who moved like a frightened ghost. He saw the way she never complained, even when Madame Jang was cruel. He saw the way she hummed when she polished the glass in the East Wing, thinking no one was listening. And one day, he watched her in the servants' dining area. He watched her take her small bowl of cold rice and vegetables. He watched her carefully divide the tiny portion in two. She ate one half slowly, and then, with deliberate care, wrapped the other half in a napkin and hid it in her pocket. He saw the quiet dignity in her hunger, and it was like looking in a mirror. It threw him back 20 years, to a boy who used to steal crusts of bread from the orphanage kitchen and hide them under his thin mattress, wrapped in newspaper. A boy who learned, very young, that hunger wasn't the worst thing in the world. Being broken was. Losing yourself was. Folake Ideal had no idea that her quiet, desperate act of survival had just caught the eye of a man who understood it better than anyone. A man who was about to break every rule he had ever lived by. It was past midnight when the 3-car convoy slid through the automated gates. The black sedans were silent, their engines purring like sleeping panthers. The headlights cut through the rain, which was coming down so hard it sounded like static, like the world was ending. Seo Jin-woo sat in the back of his car, his expression dead. The meeting in Busan had gone as planned, which meant the other party hadn't walked away from the table. There was blood on the cuff of his white shirt. He hadn't bothered to wipe it off. His driver, Kang Dae-hyun, a man who had been with him for a decade, pulled up to the main entrance and cut the engine. The silence in the car was heavy. "Sir, we are here." Jin-woo didn't move, because through the rain-streaked window, he saw something that didn't belong. A shape, a small, dark figure, huddled by the wall of the servants' quarters, crouched down like a wounded animal. At first, he thought it was a stray dog, but then the figure moved, lifting a hand to wipe the streaming rain from her face. And he saw her. Folake. She was drenched, soaked to the skin. Her thin jacket, the one she always wore, was useless against this storm. It clung to her, making her look even smaller, almost fragile. Her hair was plastered to her face, and in her hands, which were shaking so hard he could see it from the car, she held a piece of bread. Not fresh bread, not even day-old bread. It was stale, hard, the kind the kitchen threw out for the birds. Jin-woo sat frozen, watching. He watched her lift the bread to her mouth and bite down. She had to pull, it was so hard. She chewed slowly, her eyes closed, as if it were the only thing in the world. And then, she did the thing that shattered his control. She carefully, deliberately, tore the remaining piece of bread in half. She ate one small piece, and the other, she wrapped in the same small napkin she always used, folding it with a care that was almost reverent. She tucked it into her pocket, saving it. "Sir," Kang Dae-hyun said, his voice hesitant. "That's the new maid. The one from Nigeria." Jin-woo's jaw tightened until it ached. "I know who she is. Madame Jang reported she refused her kitchen leftovers tonight." Kang Dae-hyun continued, reading from his notes. "She said the girl was being stubborn." Jin-woo didn't answer. He couldn't, because looking at her, the pride she had, even in her hunger, the dignity she held on to, even in the storm, it was a reflection of himself he had spent his entire adult life trying to kill. The orphanage. He was 8 years old, skin and bones, with bruises on his ribs that never seemed to fade. The older boys always took his food. The staff looked the other way, so he learned to steal. He learned to hide crusts of bread under his mattress, wrapped in a stolen piece of newspaper. He would save it for the nights when the gnawing ache in his stomach was so bad he couldn't sleep. He remembered the shame. He remembered how hunger made you feel small, invisible, worthless. But he also remembered the promise he made to himself in that cold, dark room. A vow whispered to the ceiling. "I will never beg. I will never be this weak again. I will never let anyone make me feel like this." He had kept that promise. He had clawed his way to the top. He had built an empire of fear. He was untouchable. But watching this woman, who had every reason to be broken, who should have been broken, still holding on to her dignity like it was a shield, still saving half her bread, as if later was a place she still believed in. He felt that old, buried part of him crack. Kang Dae-hyun shifted in his seat. "Sir, should I have one of the men?" "No." Jin-woo's voice was sharp. He opened the car door himself and stepped out. He didn't take an umbrella. He just stepped out into the driving rain. The cold hit him instantly, but he didn't feel it. He had spent 20 years building walls so high that no one could ever see the starving boy he used to be. But in this moment, all he could see was himself, kneeling in the dirt. He couldn't walk past her. He couldn't pretend she was just air. And what he did next, no one saw coming. Folake didn't hear him. The rain was a roar in her ears, drowning out everything else. She was thinking about home. She was thinking about her mother's last message. "Are you eating well, my dear?" She was thinking about the lie she'd sent back. "Yes, Mama. So much food." She was thinking about how much longer she could do this. How much longer she could survive before she just faded away. And then a shadow fell over her. A shadow that blocked out the dim lights from the house. She looked up, and her heart stopped. Seo Jin-woo. He was standing right in front of her, the rain plastering his white shirt to his chest, making the blood on his cuff stand out in stark, terrifying relief. His dark eyes were fixed on her, and the intensity in that look stole the air from her lungs. The piece of bread she was holding slipped from her numb fingers. It hit the wet stone with a small, sad sound. She scrambled to her knees, bowing her head, hands shaking violently. This was it. She was seen. She was dead. This is what Mrs. Park had warned her about. "I'm sorry," she whispered, the word torn away by the wind. "I'm sorry, sir." I didn't mean. I'll go inside. I'm sorry. She squeezed her eyes shut, waiting for the kick, the scream, the hand grabbing her hair. Get up. His voice was low and rough, like gravel. It was the first time he had ever spoken to her. She flinched, rising on legs that felt like water. She kept her eyes glued to the ground, terrified. But the blow never came. Instead, she felt a sudden warmth and a heavy weight. Jin-woo was taking off his suit jacket, the expensive, black wool, still carrying the heat of his body. He draped it over her small, trembling shoulders. The weight of it, the impossible kindness of it, almost made her collapse. From now on, he said, and his voice was not kind, not soft. It was hard. It was an order. You do not eat out here. You eat inside, in the main kitchen, with the rest of the staff. Folake couldn't speak. She couldn't move. This wasn't real. It was a dream. He stepped closer, so close she could smell the rain on him, and something else, metallic, like old pennies. Blood. She could feel the danger rolling off him like heat. But his voice, when he spoke again, was aimed at the whole world, not just her. Anyone who stops you, he said, each word a spike driven into the night. Anyone who whispers about you, anyone who makes you feel less. They will not work here tomorrow. Her head snapped up. Her eyes, wide with terror and disbelief, finally met his. And for the first time in months, she saw something other than coldness or cruelty. She saw recognition. He saw her, not as a maid, not as a foreigner, not as dirt. As a person. He didn't wait for her to say thank you. He didn't wait for a response. He just turned, his white shirt now soaked through, and walked back toward the main house, the rain streaming down his back. He left her standing in the storm, wrapped in his coat, shaking for a completely different reason. Folake stood there, frozen, for a long, long time. The world had just tilted on its axis. Then, slowly, she pulled the heavy coat tighter. It was huge on her. She buried her face in the collar. It smelled like expensive cologne, like the storm, and like that dark, metallic scent she couldn't name. And for the first time since she'd landed in Korea, she let herself cry. Not quiet, hidden tears. She sobbed, protected by his coat and the noise of the rain. It wasn't a cry of despair. It was something far more dangerous. It was a cry of hope. But in the shadows of the East Wing, from a window shielded from the rain, two men watched the entire scene. Chief Min, Jin-woo's stoic head of security, and Director Han, his cold, precise financial advisor. They had been with him for over a decade. They were loyal. They were predators. And they were deeply, deeply unsettled. Did you just see that? Han whispered, his voice thin. Min's face was unreadable. I saw it. He gave his coat to the help. The foreign one. It's more than that, Min said, his voice low. He noticed her. He spoke to her. He protected her. A heavy, dangerous silence filled the room. That, Han said finally, is a weakness. Or a distraction, Min replied. They didn't need to finish the thought. In their world, weakness and distraction were the same thing. They were blood in the water, and the sharks were already circling. Inside the mansion, Jin-woo stood in his dark study. He hadn't turned on the lights. He was staring at his own reflection in the black, rain-lashed window. His coat was gone. The blood was still on his cuff. And for the first time in 20 years, he felt something he had sworn he would never feel again. Vulnerability. He poured a glass of whiskey, drank it in one motion, and poured another. But the alcohol couldn't burn away the image of her, kneeling in the rain, saving half her bread, and refusing to be broken. What the hell are you doing, Jin-woo? He muttered to his reflection. He already knew the answer. He was making a mistake. The oldest mistake in the book. He was starting to care. And in his world, caring was how you got a knife in your back. It took 3 days. 3 days for the kindness to curdle into poison. The whispers spread through the mansion's ventilation, through the staff quarters, in the kitchens, and the laundry rooms. The boss showed interest. He gave his coat to the maid. Not just any maid. Her. The foreign one. The black girl who doesn't belong. In a house built on a rigid, terrified hierarchy, that single act of kindness was a bomb. It was a declaration of war. The whispers came first. Folake would walk into the laundry, and the other maids would fall silent, turning their backs to her. She's a spy, one of the kitchen staff hissed, just loud enough for Folake to hear. Planted by the Kim family. Using that innocent act to get close to him. I heard she's a witch, another said. Use some kind of magic on him. Women like that, they know how to trap powerful men. She's dangerous. She'll be the end of all of us. Folake heard none of it directly, not in words she could understand. But she felt it. She felt the temperature drop when she entered a room. She felt the eyes on her back. She felt the hatred. Her cleaning tasks suddenly became impossible. Her workspace was always the dirtiest. Her laundry was lost. But she kept her head down. She did her work. She tried to remain invisible, even though she was now the most visible person in the house. Then the threats began. The first one was waiting for her on her thin mattress. A dead rat, its throat slit, its blood soaking into the cheap fabric. Folake stared at it, her stomach heaving. Bile rose in her throat. Her hands shook so hard she had to clench them into fists. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She found a plastic bag, cleaned up the mess herself, and threw it in the outside incinerator. She told no one. It's just a warning, she told herself, her heart hammering. Just to scare me. Stay quiet. Stay invisible. 2 days later, she came back to her room after a 16-hour shift, aching for sleep. She stopped in the doorway. The one precious photograph she had of her family, her mother and brother, smiling in the Lego sun, was on the floor. The glass in the frame was shattered, and someone had taken a knife and scratched out her mother's face. That night, she didn't sleep at all. Then the food started making her sick. After Jin-woo's order, she was allowed in the main kitchen, but the food given to her was wrong. It tasted strange. Not enough to kill her, just enough to leave her weak, with crippling stomach cramps. Just enough to remind her that she was powerless. She stopped eating in the kitchen. She started skipping meals altogether, surviving on water and the old, hoarded scraps she still had. Through it all, only one person showed her any humanity. Mrs. Park, the older woman from the laundry. She couldn't speak to Folake. It was too dangerous, but she would sometimes leave a clean, wrapped piece of fruit outside her door. Or she would catch Folake's eye across the grand hall and give her the smallest, saddest smile. A smile that said, I see you. Be strong. One morning, Mrs. Park didn't come to work. Her station in the laundry was empty. Her few belongings were gone. A cold dread, worse than anything she'd felt before, settled in Folake's stomach. She found Madame Zhang in the hallway, inspecting a vase. Folake forgot the rules. She forgot the danger. She ran up and grabbed the headmaid's arm. Where is she? Folake demanded, her voice shaking with a desperate anger. Where is Mrs. Park? Madame Zhang's face went rigid. She slowly, deliberately, yanked her arm free from Folake's grip. Her eyes were as cold and dead as winter stone. She talked too much, Madame Zhang said in her sharp, clear Korean, knowing the tone was all that mattered. She is gone. She paused, then added in broken English so the message was clear. You, remember that. The message was not just clear. It was a death sentence. Kindness is not allowed here. Vulnerability is a fatal mistake. Jin-woo felt the shift, too. His world was also tilting. His lieutenants, men who had served him for years, suddenly found it hard to meet his gaze in meetings. Chief Min, his head of security, questioned a strategic decision for the first time in 5 years. Director Han began copying others on financial reports that were meant for Jin-woo's eyes only. They were small things, subtle challenges to his authority. But Jin-woo had survived by noticing the smallest tremors before the earthquake. Something was wrong, and he had a sick, sinking feeling he knew who it was about. He found her late one night. He was on his way to his study when he heard a noise from the main kitchen, a rhythmic, frantic scrubbing. He walked in. The kitchen was dark, except for the small light over the sink. Folake was on her hands and knees, scrubbing the white tile floor. But the floor was already spotless. It gleamed. Yet she kept scrubbing, her arm moving in a fast, desperate circle. That's when he saw it. The water in her bucket wasn't just gray with soap. It was pink. There was blood smeared on the white tile. It was dripping from her hand. Folake. She flinched so hard she hit her head on the counter. She spun around, her face pale and terrified. Mr. Seo? I'm sorry. I didn't know you were here. I'm almost finished. Your hand. His voice was flat. She immediately hid her right hand behind her back. It's nothing. I'm fine. I broke a glass. Earlier. It's just a small cut. Show me. It wasn't a request. It was a command. The voice he used when he was done with games. Slowly, her shoulders slumping in defeat, She brought her hand forward. It was wrapped in a dirty kitchen towel, which was soaked through with dark, red blood. The cut was deep, running jaggedly across her palm. It was not from a glass. Jin-woo stared at her. He stared at the poorly wrapped, bleeding wound. He stared at the absolute terror in her eyes, the way she held herself, bracing for a blow. And he knew, with chilling certainty, that she was lying. Comment right now, what would you do? Should she tell him the truth and risk the consequences, or stay silent and endure the abuse? Because what happens next changes everything. Jin-woo didn't say another word. He just turned on his heel and walked out of the kitchen toward his private study. Folake stood frozen, her heart hammering. What did I do? Is he angry? Am I being fired? Am I gone like Mrs. Park? She didn't know if she was supposed to follow, or stay, or run. His voice cut through the silence of the hall. Come with me. Now. She obeyed. Her legs felt like they were moving through wet cement. She followed him to the study. He held the heavy oak door open for her. She stepped inside. He followed, and the door closed behind them with a heavy, final click. Folake's breath hitched when she heard the sound of the lock sliding into place. He turned to face her. The room was dark, lit only by the blue-white glow of the city through the massive window. And the look in his eyes, it wasn't the anger she was expecting. It wasn't the cold rage. It was something else. Something raw, and barely controlled. He didn't ask what happened. He didn't ask if she was okay. He asked one simple question. Who hurt you? It was the voice of the ghost of Itaewon. The voice of a man who built an empire on getting the answers he wanted. Folake's entire body was trembling. No one. I told you. I broke a glass. I was clumsy. Don't. His voice dropped to a whisper, and it was more terrifying than any shout. Don't lie to me. He took a step closer. Not you. And something about the way he said it. Not you. As if she was different, as if her lies mattered more than others. It shattered the dam she had built inside herself. It all came out. The words poured out of her in a torrent, a flood of whispers and sobs. The dead rat. The shattered photograph of her mother. The poisoned food. The whispers. The loneliness. The hatred. And Mrs. Park. She choked out, tears streaming down her face. She was kind to me. She just smiled at me. And now she's gone. Madame Jang said she was gone. She finally looked up at him, her face a mess of tears and terror. They think I'm using you. They think I'm a spy, or a witch. They think I'm dangerous. And maybe they're right. Maybe just by being here, Jin-woo's hands were shaking. His hands. She had never seen him lose control, not for a second. But now, his jaw was clenched so tight, she thought his teeth might crack. His breathing was shallow, and his eyes were burning with a cold, precise fury that terrified her. Stay here tonight, he said. His voice was too quiet. Dangerously quiet. Lock this door. Don't open it for anyone. Do you understand? For anyone but me. What? What are you going to do? He was already moving to the door, unlocking it. Lock the door, Folake. Jin-woo. He stopped, his hand on the doorknob. He turned back. And for just 1 second, the mask was gone. The ghost was gone. And she saw the man. His expression was full of a pain that mirrored her own. No one, he said, and his voice was a raw promise, touches you again. Ever. Then he was gone, and she heard the sound of his footsteps moving quickly down the hall. What happened next was never spoken of. Not in a whisper. Not ever again. But the evidence was absolute. 3 of Jin-woo's most trusted, long-term lieutenants did not show up for the 8 a.m. security meeting. Chief Min Director Han and Manager Go, who ran the mansion's internal operations. Their offices were cleared out by noon. Desks empty, computers wiped, personal effects gone. There was no explanation. They just ceased to be. By evening, their families, their wives, their children, their elderly parents, all received identical envelopes delivered by silent messengers. Inside was a large amount of cash. Enough to start a new life somewhere very, very far away. And one-way, first-class tickets out of Seoul, dated for that same night. The message was unspoken, but crystal clear. Leave now. Never come back. Never speak of this. Or this money will be for your funeral. At 6 a.m., just as the sun was rising, Madame Jang, the head maid, was summoned to Mr. Seo's office. She was in there for 20 minutes. When she emerged, her face, usually so rigid with authority, was ashen, gray. Her hands were shaking so badly, she had to clasp them in front of her. She walked, stiff-legged, directly to Folake's small room in the servants' quarters. Folake was inside, packing her few things, terrified she was next. Madame Jang knocked softly. Folake opened the door, her heart in her throat. Madame Jang did not speak. She simply bowed. A deep, 90-degree bow of respect. A bow she would normally only give to Jin-woo himself. "I apologize," she said, her voice shaking, her eyes fixed on the floor. She spoke in broken, halting English, forcing the words out. For everything. It will not happen again." Then she turned and walked away. By the end of that day, the entire mansion understood the new world order. Folake ideal was not to be looked at, not to be whispered about, not to be touched. She was untouchable, not because she had asked for power, but because the most dangerous man in Seoul had wrapped her in his protection. But the victory, if it was won, felt cold and hollow. That night, Folake returned to her room. It was different. A new mattress was on the bed. A new, beautiful frame was on her nightstand, holding her, now repaired, photograph. There were fresh linens. She sat on the edge of the new, comfortable bed, and she cried. Not from relief. From something far more complicated. She was safe now. She was protected. But what had it cost? How many people had just disappeared because of her? Mrs. Park was still gone. Now, so were Min, Han, and Go. How much blood was on her hands, simply because she existed in the wrong place at the wrong time? And the most terrifying question of all, what happens when the man protecting you is the same monster everyone else fears? She fell asleep, still wearing Jin-woo's coat, which she had never returned. And for the first time since landing in this country, she dreamed of something other than home. She dreamed of him. The weeks that followed were the strangest of Folake's life. The mansion, which had been her prison, slowly changed. The air felt different. The fear was still there, but it was no longer aimed at her. It was aimed around her. It started small. Seo Jin-woo began taking his morning tea in the glass sunroom, which overlooked the gardens, instead of in his dark, private study. And somehow, it was always Folake who was assigned to serve it. The first few times, the silence was deafening. She would move quietly, pouring the hot tea with steady hands, her heart hammering. He would sit, reading financial reports, not looking at her. They just existed in the same quiet space. Then, one morning, he spoke. "What does your name mean?" Folake blinked, startled. She set the teapot down. "My name?" "Folake." He nodded, still looking at his papers. "It means cared for with tenderness. Or cherished." He looked up from his papers then. His dark eyes held hers. "And ideal. It means joy has come home." He considered that for a long moment. He nodded slowly. "And do you still believe that? That joy will come home?" She met his gaze, and for the first time, she wasn't afraid. "I believe I am still here. Some days, that is enough." Something shifted between them after that. The silence became less of an absence and more of a shared space. The conversations grew. They were small at first, then longer, deeper. She taught him Igbo words. "This," she said, holding her hand to her chest, "is Obi. It means heart." "Obi," he repeated. The pronunciation was rough, and she laughed. A real, light, genuine laugh. The sound of it surprised them both. And Seo Jin-woo, the ghost of Itaewon, smiled. Not the cold, sharp smile he used in his business, but a small, real, unguarded smile. It changed his entire face. "And this," she said, "is Eneni. Mother." "Eneni," he repeated, and his smile faded. "And Udo. It means peace." He told her about the orphanage. He didn't tell her everything, just fragments. About the cold. About the hunger. About the boy who stole bread and made a vow to himself that he would never be weak again. "I never wanted to be that boy again," he said, staring out at the garden. "So I became this." She told him about Lagos. About the smell of the rain on the hot pavement. About her mother's hands, worn from work but always gentle. About her younger brother who wanted to be a doctor and heal the world. "I was supposed to help them," she whispered one morning, her voice thick with guilt. "I was supposed to be the one to change our lives. That's why I came here. And instead, you are still helping them," Jin-woo said, his voice quiet but firm. "You are sending them money. You are lying to them to protect them. And you are surviving this." He looked at her. "That is more than most people could do. You are not weak, Folake. You are the strongest person I have ever met." Their hands were on the table, inches apart. The space between them hummed with an energy that neither of them dared to name. Then the file arrived. It was a simple manila folder. A routine 6-month background audit on all household staff and their contracts. Standard protocol. Jin-woo's new head of security, a man who didn't ask questions, had left it on his desk. He opened Folake's file without a second thought, just to sign off on it. And his world stopped. Employment history, recruited by Apex Global Solutions. Proprietor, Park Sung-jin. Jin-woo's blood turned to ice. Park Sung-jin, a name he hadn't thought about in years. A minor operator he'd inherited when he'd absorbed a rival's assets 5 years ago. It was a clean business on paper. International employment, staffing solutions, legitimate placements. Jin-woo had barely glanced at it. It made money, and it wasn't violent, so he left it alone. Except it wasn't clean. He felt the bile rise in his throat. It was human trafficking, dressed up in business suits and spreadsheets. His hands were shaking as he flipped through the rest of the file. Recruitment details, promise of nursing position at Seoul Private Hospital, non-existent. Passport confiscated upon arrival. Debt bondage contract enacted. Every word was a nail in his coffin. She wasn't just trapped in his house. She was trapped in his system. He owned the company that had stolen her life. He was the reason she was here. He was the reason she was kneeling in the rain, eating stale bread. He was the reason she was scrubbing floors instead of saving lives in a hospital. The monster she had been running from. The man who had been protecting her. They were the same person. He sat in his office, in the dark, until the sun set and the city lights came on. He just stared at that open file, his hands clenched so tight his knuckles were white. Then he stood up. He walked to her room. He knocked once. She opened the door, and she was smiling. A genuine, happy to see him smile. It was like a knife in his chest. "Jin-woo," she said. "What's wrong?" His face must have told her everything. Her smile died. He stepped inside, closed the door, and told her. He told her everything. About Park Sung-jin. About Apex Global Solutions. About how it was all, in the end, his. Folake listened. Her face didn't change. She stood perfectly still, but her hands, hanging at her sides, began to tremble. When he finished, the silence in the room was so heavy it felt hard to breathe. "Say something," he whispered. His voice cracked. "Please. Yell at me. Hit me. Say something." She looked up at him, and her eyes were not full of anger. They were full of something much, much worse. They were broken. "So all of this," she said, her voice a dead, flat whisper. "The coat. The protection. The tea in the mornings. Madame Jang's apology." She took a shaky breath. It was guilt. No. The word was torn out of him. No. At first, when I saw the file, yes. But that's not what this is. Not anymore. "Then what is it?" she whispered, her eyes pleading with him, daring him to lie. He stepped closer, so close he could see the unshed tears balanced on her lashes. It's everything, Folake. You are everything. You're the only real thing in this whole damn house. In my whole damn life. And I. Then let me go." The 3 words hung in the air like a death sentence. Jin-woo stared at her, shattered. "What? If you care about me," she whispered, and the first tear finally fell, tracing a path down her cheek. "If any of this was real, if you are not the monster you think you are, then give me back the choice you took away. Give me back my life. Let me go." His hands shook. His breath hitched. He could do anything. He could bury bodies. He could destroy empires. He could break men with a single word. But this? Letting her go? This might be the one thing that would actually kill him. But he looked in her eyes, and he saw the woman who saved half her bread. The woman who hummed to remember who she was. The woman who had more strength in her smallest finger than he had in his entire syndicate. And he nodded. 1 week later, Folake Ayadil stood in Incheon International Airport. In her hand, she held a new, clean, legitimate passport. In her pocket was a bank card, linked to an account with enough money to not just start over, but to give her family the life she had always dreamed of. And in her bag was a one-way, first-class ticket to Lagos. All of it arranged by Jin-woo. He didn't come to say goodbye. He couldn't. He knew. If he saw her one more time, if he saw her walking away, he would beg her to stay. He would lock her in the mansion and protect her from the world. And he would become the monster she deserved to escape. Folake stood at the gate. The boarding call was echoing. Around her, families were hugging, travelers were rushing past. Life was moving on, just like normal. She thought about the mansion. She thought about the cold marble and the sound of the rain. She thought about his coat on her shoulders. She thought about the way he'd stumbled over the word obi. I thought love was supposed to feel like safety, she whispered to herself, clutching her passport. But sometimes love feels like letting go. She looked back, one last time, toward the entrance. He wasn't there. But somehow, she knew he was watching. I learned that mercy isn't about power, she thought, as she finally turned and walked down the jet bridge. It's about seeing someone when the rest of the world has made them invisible. And sometimes, the most painful kindness is giving someone the choice you never had. The plane took off, lifting into the clouds. Folake closed her eyes, holding on to the memory of a man who became human because he saw her, even if it destroyed them both. Back in Seoul, in the cold, silent mansion, Seo Jin-woo sat alone in his study. The sunroom was empty. The house was quiet again, exactly as it had been before she came. But now, the silence was unbearable. It screamed. On his desk, folded carefully, was a small, worn napkin, the one she had used to wrap her stale bread in the rain. He had retrieved it from the courtyard that night. He still had it. It was a reminder that once, just once, he had chosen to be more than the monster everyone feared, even if it cost him the only thing he had ever truly loved. So what do you think? Did she make the right choice? Or did she walk away from the only person who ever truly saw her? Maybe that's not the real question. Maybe the real question is, could you have forgiven him? Can love ever survive a truth that toxic? Can someone be both your savior and your cage? I want to know what you think. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Would you have chosen freedom, or would you have chosen that complicated, dangerous love? And if this story touched your heart, hit that like button, and be sure to subscribe to Afro-Korean Soul Tales for more stories that get under your skin. Stories about broken people, impossible choices, and the messy, beautiful, and painful truth of what it means to be human. Remember this. The people who show you kindness in your darkest hour aren't always angels. Sometimes, they're just fellow broken souls, trying to find a piece of their own humanity in you. And sometimes, love isn't a fairy tale. Sometimes, it's just two people, standing in the storm, giving each other the one thing they have left to give. A choice. Thank you for watching. We'll see you in the next story.